Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And the story I'm talking about today is one of my own. We have reached episode 56 of my series, Worth 1,000 Words, where I write a 1,000 word short story based on a piece of artwork without an outline, of course. And I miss science fiction. I need to go back and do some science fiction. So I chose a piece that I felt had an interesting story to tell or discover. I'm not sure if I discovered the best one, but again, you will see and you will hear all of my critiques later in the video. First, let's talk about the music I listen to. So my good friend who has been writing a crazy amount of music lately, if I could only write as many books, as many albums as he puts out, I'd be doing a lot better. But anyway, Michael E. Tennant released a new album called Strolling Through the Universe. It's electronic. It's very spacey looking and feeling, so I thought it would be a good match. However, when I listened to it, it's much more hopeful than the story I wrote. I feel like the artwork was a little bit more grim, and I gravitate toward that. But it's still a great one, and I highly encourage you to check it out. Link is in the description below. All right, well, let's check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Misfire, and it is by a concept artist out of Berlin, Germany, named Leif Heanzo. So let us take a closer look. First of all, I was feeling some sci-fi. And this one caught my eye because it wasn't just somebody exploring the surface of a planet, in wonder and discovery. This was it looks to be a crash landed ship. And I love the details of the fire. It almost looks like waves of fire in the foreground, or I should say in the background. And then we have this lone figure standing there observing this in shock, or is he observing it knowingly because he was the cause of it? And then you see some kind of tower that looks run down. There's these massive slabs of stone, it looks like, just behind him. So this one to me had more of a story to tell. And I wanted to figure it out. I wanted to figure out if this guy, is he responsible for what's happened? Or is he just standing there helplessly? Maybe he just walked into frame and saw this here. Or maybe he's a survivor. Maybe he left the ship and is watching this. I don't know, but these are the kind of details I look for and enjoy because they speak story. So, Leif, thank you for this artwork. I love all your sci-fi work, so keep it up. All right, with that said, let's see what I came up with. The sky of smoke without fire, a sandstorm roiling, a streak of molten atmosphere, hanging there, burning there, a scar. Carlson's fingertips pound his visor with futile urgency. All he sees has seeped into his helmet, into his head, through his eyes, which burn like nothing he's felt before. Maybe what he saw had been sitting at the window, then standing when that became boring. Carlson's toes flexed over the edge of the hemispheric view that might have been beautiful once. No reflection, no fingerprints. He might as well not have been there. He was the only one there. Had been since the sky had rolled in like sand suspended underwater, except there was no water anywhere on this moon. Well, except Carlson sipped from a thimble-sized container that recycled his sweat and piss. He popped some potassium and sodium for good measure, a little magnesium. It helped him sleep, staved off the hunger for which he had no device to recycle his shit. He'd heard about them. An illusion. Maybe what he saw had been a trick of whatever was in the sky. An illusion. Maybe what he saw was a trick of whatever is in the sky, plus the blips of light from the incoming ship. That must be it. His left hand, the one that doesn't try to rub his eyes, has a gravity all its own, pulling his shoulder down, muscles straining just to keep his spine erect. Guilt is heavy as hell. Something what's-his-name with a perpetual sneer had told Carlson, before he set off with that sneer to a new system. Carlson hoped someone had punched it off by now. Anyway, he didn't have one of those devices. And he'd gotten a six-pack for the first time in his life, the hairs on his belly falling into those symmetrical trenches to emphasize the sculpted putty protrusions. There was no one here but him to admire them. Still no reflection on the glass, so not even him. That arm, the heavy one, or is it his hand, drops to his knee and he lets it. It grew a mind of its own, and it decided it wanted to get the hell away from him, but is limited to the fact that it is attached. It's not my fault, Carlson says. His hand doesn't answer, just works on a maneuver that feels like it might detach his shoulder from its socket. The comm socket crackled. Carlson had smashed it a month ago when the last call he'd received had been the distress signal of a passing cruiser. A one-way communication when he was the only one who needed help. Him, goddammit. He spit in its direction, a mist that forced him to take another drink from his piss thimble. Shut up, he said to it. It didn't, and the crackle intensified, almost vocalizing its mutual disdain. Carlson tried to ignore it, folding his only pair of shirt and pants. He mostly walked around naked anymore. The crackle was incessant. He padded over to it. I said, shut up. The pattern hit him like the ship that had crash-landed him here, so hard he was sure to have a crater in his skull. He leaned closer to make sure, the circuit board throwing sparks at him. You've got to be fucking kidding me. He slammed a palm to the machine, then punched the arming code into the dial pad. He grabbed his shirt and muffled the comm socket, and jumped on his bunk, training his ear to the ceiling, waiting for the buzz of extension. Would it be able to handle the storm outside? Tired of standing, Carlson sits among the wreckage, chunks of his own watchtower smoldering in front and behind him. It paints quite the picture. A lake which, when the breeze is just right, like now, produces waves of flame. Small ones, almost like paper boats burning. Those flames underlight the hull of the cruiser that hangs on life support, along with the storm that never got closer, taunting him from the distance. With what little energy the ship has left, it makes sure Carlson knows it's his fault. Wait. Carlson took his palm to the side of his head, then shook his brain. That made no sense. Carvers didn't come out this far, and why would they alert him of their existence? The solar cannons clicked into place. Dust streamed from the ceiling tiles, landing in his eyes. Hand heels in his own sockets, he screamed. Fuck! The comm socket repeated the message. With his eyes closed, Carlson was sure of it now. Their voices, twisted by mutilation, were unmistakable. It, Carlson said. Fuck it. His right hand busy trying to clear his eyes, he entered the code in with his other, those pads still retaining the grip coating of disuse. The solar cannons fired, streaks frozen in time until they initiated a bolt of energy, not unlike a fault line, to split the sky. It was as if that storm out there wasn't a storm at all, but a shell incubating all of his failures, birthing them into one immense tangible force that was enough to take down a ship. The storm shell divided, letting the target through. A clean nose, flawless hull, layers and shapes complex to a pointless degree, signifying the mark of the house fleet. He threw on his suit, still naked, climbed down to the surface to make sure it was real, because it couldn't be real. The ship's final light flickers, then goes dark. The lake of fire ensures Carlson can still see the ship in the murk, since the sky appears to be darkening. Carl's left hand, which possesses his trigger finger, lets him get to his feet. Maybe it decided there was no hope left, and they were in this together, despite its emergent consciousness, which grew to hate him. Most likely, it feels his hatred too. Carlson turns his back on his failure and returns to his post where he can remove his helmet and rub the grit from his eyes. The first thing I thought of when I saw this image was how everything looks underwater. Kind of reminds me of this just crazy sandstorm, but if you've ever been, in an ocean and the light is streaming through the water, you see the sand suspended there. That's immediately what I thought of. And again, as I always do, I take this first paragraph to kind of pick through the scene, try to find some interesting imagery. And you'll notice that, I say, sky of smoke without fire. However, there is fire, so that's probably a bad thing. Again, something I'll fix later. A sandstorm roiling, a streak of molten atmosphere, hanging there, burning there, a scar. Now, those things you don't see. But what I decided at this point is that this man was going to be responsible for the ship crash landing. I imagined he worked or resided in this strange tower off to the left. Maybe he was left behind. I didn't know, but I wanted it to be a mistake. And what I decided to do initially is alternate the story. So I would have aspects where he was in the present. It's as you see him here. So right here where it says Carlson's fingertips pounded his visor with futile urgency. All he saw had somehow gotten into his helmet, into his head, through his eyes, etc., etc. That was him in the present. And so that's part of what that first paragraph is. It's him perceiving what he's seeing, right? He's kind of in shock, honestly, because as the figure looks, he looks similarly in shock. He's not, his body language to me speaks that because his hands are at his sides. He's just kind of standing there, not really any indication of what else he might be feeling. So next, what I wanted to do right after this M dash is take him into the past, take him back to the past. So we're starting to learn about where he came from, what he's doing. So I'm talking about him sitting at the window and standing there. He's just kind of bored. He's alone, clearly. He's starving. I talk about him popping some potassium and some sodium for good measure, a little magnesium. It helped him sleep and staved off the hunger for which he had no device to recycle his shit. And this is probably a bad idea what I did here. I mean, I never fixed it. And in the reading, I pretty much understood, or figured out it was a bad decision. So I talk about an illusion. What I was trying to do, and I've done this in the past, is kind of link the prior paragraph or the final one with the next one. And so the reason being is it's kind of like this connective tissue. It's almost like a match cut to a degree. But it's funny because when I read this back, I was kind of confused. So clearly, and that's the thing. I say this a lot, but reading for me is very visual. I love the idea of audiobooks, and I have listened to plenty of them, but it's just a different experience for me. I mean, even if you have a great narrator, my mind tends to wander. It's very difficult for me to not think about something else, no matter how captivating the book is. It's probably my weakness and mine alone, but my mind wanders. I think about different things a lot of times because I do write. I hear a line or a scene, and I start to think about how, I really like how they did that. I could apply that to my story. And I don't know, I feel like when you're reading a book, it's just very visual. It's not a passive thing like audio. But anyway, getting off topic. So here I am switching back to the past, where he's talking about some guy who I should have linked it back, because really this connects the paragraph where he's talking about the device that can recycle his shit. I wasn't clear. And I think that's the lesson I learned here. Maybe the lesson you can learn here is clarity, because I was trying to do some, interesting, not unique in any way or not original, but an interesting way to kind of go back and forth in time. Because I didn't want to have the entire piece of him standing here as you see it in the artwork. I wanted us to learn a little bit about who this guy was, where it came from. But I like the idea of him just being, standing there in shock. Because I think sometimes when you see something or you're startled or you're in a situation, your mind goes back, to where it all began, essentially. And that's what I was trying to do here. And I kind of personified his hand here, the arm, the heavy one, or was it his hand? Dropped to his knee and he let it. So this is actually the hand. Again, another thing I probably could have been clearer on. This was the hand that actually punched in the arming code, to fire the weapon while he was wiping the sand out of his eyes. And that was funny. That was kind of an element that I didn't expect. And it's interesting how our minds work that way, where you'll add in some kind of little detail, some element that's just completely, seemingly unrelated. It's like a flavor element. Basically when he armed the guns, he looked up, and then the dust from the ceiling tiles came down and got into his eyes. But then I used that as the last line. And I liked that last line because it's it has some subtext to it, I think. I think those are the most powerful ones. It's not a particularly interesting line, but it calls back to where he began, the decision he made to launch this or arm these cannons and shoot the ship down. And so we hear he. It's funny because you'll notice it if you're watching this. I started to make it someone he knew. And then I changed it because I wanted him to make a mistake. Because I was thinking, like, well, how am I going to have him make a mistake if he recognizes the signal of the ship? Because I've already decided that I wanted this ship to be a friendly vessel, and then not an alien one. But then, in fact, he thinks it's an alien one in the beginning and shoots it down because of it. Then realizes later. Again, these things, I don't know how clear they are, and I think that when I do the second, third, however many passes it's going to take, some of these stories take a lot longer for me to clean up and make coherent than others. That's what I'm going to do. There's a lot to address in this one for sure. Here is where I start him recognizing his friend. So Gracie, Carlson called to the comm socket. He slammed upon the machine. Most of that's the same. I started out making it a hopeful thing, and I'm already halfway. So this is kind of the turning point when things are happening, which honestly was kind of funny. I didn't really notice it until now that I'm looking at the word count, but that was convenient. But yeah, I had to change it because I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, if he recognizes this signal or this pattern and he knows it's friendly, why did he shoot it down? What happened? So I was thinking, like, well, maybe something happens down the road and he kind of changes his mind or realizes something else, and that's exactly what happened. So I changed it. I went back and made it an enemy, and that's another thing that I wish I would have done. I said the house fleet. I implied that it was familiar. There's a lot of mentionings of failures here, so it's a bad thing. But I think when I go back and do this, or if I had to do it all over again, I would probably add a lot more of those elements, because you'll notice in my writing, I write from a very tight third person most of the time, meaning the character already knows everything. So sometimes saying it's a tricky balancing act, right? When somebody knows something, it's kind of like when you have two characters. You never want to have these two characters. It's sort of a writing craft no talk about something they both already know. Now, a lot of writers will do that because they want the reader to know something. However, that is a lazy way of doing it. Same thing with exposition. It's basically expository, but it doesn't feel real because people don't talk that way. Now, there's tricks in how to do it without it feeling forced like that, but that is for another time, another discussion. But anyway, that is sort of the fault of writing a tight third person. Sometimes you want to be careful because you don't want to have a lot of internal thought that's giving away history because it just doesn't make sense, right? Why is this person? You always have to think of a reason. Why is this person recalling this information? Why are they thinking about it right now? You'll notice you do that as well all the time. You kind of think back like, oh, this isn't right because blah, 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 blah. You think that way. You kind of solve the problem. You answer yourself. You're almost having a dialogue with yourself. You just have to be really careful with it, because if it's too, I know I always talk about anime and manga, and it's kind of funny because in a lot of those animes or even the mangas, there's a lot of direct internal thought, like people thinking very unrealistically. And I understand, they have limited page or limited page real estate or screen time. They need to really get the plot moving, but it's just kind of funny sometimes to me. So you want to stay away from that for sure. But I think I went too far the other way on this one. I don't think I gave enough detail onto as to who the house fleet is. Why does he know them? Another thing too I would have changed, I think, is I don't feel like I really added enough power to the cannons firing and taking the ship down. That should have been a more obvious or more epic, climactic aspect to the story. So yeah, I know I'm talking about a lot of things that would have changed, but this one was interesting because I was worried. Sometimes some stories really start slow, and it takes me a long time to get to 1,000 words. But this one, again, I think because I had the element of just flip flopping back in time and then forward again. And on that note, once I finished the story, it hit me. Once I got to the very end, I was like, I don't really think there's enough of a clue to the reader to know that, one is the past and one is the present. So what I try to do, I tried to change the tenses, which is funny because I'm sure there's some problems with the tenses as well. While I was reading it, I noticed, I'm like, I feel like that's not right. And I think that's the challenge for me with writing present tense, is I'm so used to writing past tense that there's all these, little elements you don't think about when you're when you're writing in present tense, because it's kind of a newer thing. I know it's pretty popular now, but unless you're doing it all the time, you can kind of slip up. But that's what I did. I tried to change the tenses, and it didn't happen until the very last bit. So I was kind of doing a passive editing and tense changing, some of which I missed. That's okay, because I didn't feel like I had the pacing right. I didn't feel like there was an equal division of past and present. I think that's one thing that would have been helpful too, is if I would have created a visual map, so to speak, with white space. Like, for instance, every paragraph takes you back and forth, or every third paragraph, something like that. I know a story I did a while back, I feel like I had a great solution to that, and that was kind of repeating a line, and that was a cue to the reader that, hey, we're going somewhere else. I can't remember the title. Oh, it was God, I can't remember the title, but it was the one with the soldier who was bleeding out, and he was kind of going through his memories, like through his life, like, meeting his wife, having a child, going to war. And so what I had to do is create the first line of every paragraph that I wanted to take him back, or change. Sorry, not take him back, but change locations to something that was rhythmic. It had a very similar tone and similar cadence. So that's probably something I could have done here. Although, I don't try to repeat myself. I know tenses seems like the easy way. It's not very interesting, but like I said, here I am at 1,003 words, wrapping it up, and I'm probably scrubbing around going like, shit, I really need to change this. I need to fix this somehow. So that was my easy fix. I'm not saying it's the best thing to do. It's probably one of the easiest things to do, because it's literally past and present. So if you're looking for a device to do something like that, that's one way to do it. Not the most creative way though. So keep that in mind. With this story, I feel like there's some interesting stuff. There's some not so interesting stuff. There's not enough connective tissue. There's like I said, there's some things I really like about it, but I feel like it's not as cohesive as I would like it to be. But that's okay. That's the point of this, is to learn, to figure this out, to actually make these mistakes, look back at them, and understand why you want to fix it, or understand why it does need to be fixed. Yeah, here I am changing all the tenses, which, on the surface seems simple, but it can be more challenging than you think. Give it a try with your own work. Maybe, try to take something that's all written in past tense and convert it to present. It'd be a good exercise. 7 words to go and wrapping this up, and probably missing a few present tense paragraphs. But when the clock is running in the corner of your eye, you're liable to miss a few things. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I am so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, and maybe what I learned. I played with a device, so I wanted this story to have our protagonist, our hero, our anti-hero, whoever may be, the man in the spacesuit, begin in the present, recall the past. And the past would be a device. And although it's in the past, I'm writing it in such a way that it's an active scene, which is very important, by the way. And we learn about who he is, where he came from, what led him to this event. And we find out that he was, unfortunately, the one who misfired. And that's what I love about these titles, is that they often point me in the right direction. And this one did. Now, I'm not saying the story is great by any means. It's probably one of my least favorite. I think it's going to require a lot of work to clean up. There's a lot of things that involve clarity, for instance. I don't think I was clear with a lot of things. I could have made the takedown of the ship more impactful, more climactic, I think. I could have tied in, maybe there was some relationship with who the ship was. Like maybe he was close to somebody who was on that ship, but adding a little bit of emotion always works. And so I started that way. I started out with a woman named Gracie, and then I said, well, he's making a mistake. Why is he going to think that it's her first? So I changed it to be the enemy, these people called the Carvers. I don't know, it sounded cool. It sounded better than just like standard alien. So I don't know, maybe they're more like Event Horizon kind of crazy. I don't know, space pirates. I have no idea. But anyway, my downfall here was the way I write, in that it's a very close third person. And because I do that, I don't tend to explain a lot of things, because the character shouldn't be explaining things he already knows, right? Unless it's something where he's having an internal dialogue or monologue. And that is the opportunity where you can reveal that to the reader without it feeling forced. However, I think I pulled back a little bit too much on this one, because when I was reading through, I felt like a lot of that was really thin. And it's not a hard thing to do, really. I mean, you can do it with one word, with one line. It's pretty simple. However, balancing the act of being expository or feeling like it's an actual realistic thought, that is a difficult line to balance sometimes. So I'm sure this one is going to take a lot of work for me to get through. I guess I should talk about something I liked. Well, I guess the one thing I liked is the ending. I liked how I took the device of him when he was looking up while the cannon was arming itself on top of his tower. Dust came down and fell into his eye, and I used that as a device, right, with that had subtext to it. So it wasn't just dust in his eye, but at the very end, he kind of retreats back to his post, defeated, to get back inside so he can clean his eye. And I think there's a lot to be discovered in that line. You know, I'm not going to tell you what I think. I think there's multiple meanings for it, but I don't feel like giving mine away here because, again, I really think story is about discovery. It's about what you make it. Yes, there's author intentions for sure, but sometimes the meaning you create is more interesting than the one the author thought of. So on that note, I think I'm going to end it here. Thanks for hanging out with me. If you like this video, give me a like, subscribe for story-related content, check out my books in the description below, and as always, keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.